Call this work session of the Rutherford Commission. Told you 2 minutes, and I'm sitting here looking at the clock. We've done 2 minutes, and I've called you in order to begin looking at our Plan Rutherford, or our Comprehensive Growth Plan. Before we begin, I would like to recognize I have 2 additional county commissioners that have come today to sit in on this, and I want to recognize them. I see them sitting back here. Hope Oliver, commissioner from down around Laverne, is back here in the back. She's been here with us all morning. Glad to have her with us. And Romel McMurray, sitting over here in this corner, is here. I don't think I see any others. Of course, we do have other commissioners. We have the chairman of the commission sitting over here, who's also a part of the planning commission. And Trey Gooch here, and then Mike Cush sitting here is also a part of the Planning Commission. State commissioners who are not part of this committee have taken the time out of their day to come here and be a part to see what we're doing and how we're doing it. And we also have the mayor back here in the doorway too, that's here with us this morning. This is what we've come to. We've been talking about this for over 2 years now. Actually, this morning I was thinking about how long we have been talking about this. I happened to go to that little part that shows up in Facebook ever so often called Rutherford Politics. Sitting in there this morning was something from the Murfreesboro Pulse, I believe is what it's called. Publication, and it was talking about this, and it mentioned the fact that it mentioned the mayor's name in there, and it mentioned my name in there, and what we've said about this and some different things. But actually, the very, very beginning of this actually started with, I think, Mayor Ketron, when we started talking about getting ready to do this, and we opened up discussing this, and I believe talk about, and then we went on and changed mayors, and then sometimes a mayor inherits things and followed through and carried through with what we've got to do and where we got to go with our comprehensive growth plan. You know, a comprehensive growth plan is just not for a county. Also this morning I used that thing called Google. I sat there and I said, you know, I remember another growth plan I went to look at and seen what they were doing. I just Googled City of Murfreesboro. I think it's called 2035, Murfreesboro 2035. There it was, another comprehensive growth plan right here in Rutherford County. And to look at it or not, but it's there also. And the thing that I have told people, and I think you will probably tell them that, living plan has the capability of being changed as we go along. And I noticed Murfreesboro has changed theirs quite often about doing that. So this is something that in today's world, as we continue to grow what we do and how we do this, everybody talks about where is growth coming from and how did this happen so fast. It didn't happen really fast. I happened to be on the Cumberland Region Tomorrow board at one time. And we were continually studying growth in a 10-county region around Nashville. I don't know how many different surveys and different things we did to look at growth of what was going to affect the 10 counties around Nashville. That was a continuous effort of looking at those things and, you know, somewhat predicted in many years. So, approved comprehensive plan of Rutherford County right here. Trying to come up with improvements and make changes. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my planning director and let him go from here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, really, I can't add a whole lot more to what you've already said. Quite frankly, you said it very well. I will say that, we've had a number of public meetings on this. We've had a number of comments submitted for this as well. The whole purpose of this Plan Rutherford work session that we're having right now, the primary goal I think that we want to see out of today's session really is to have us give our development or our consultant team, GNRC, some guidance as far as what the final draft is going to look like. The recommendations that were made based off the feedback that we did get, the feedback that we've received since that time, and kind of saying, okay, this is what we really want to see moving forward. We know that changes needed to be made. As you look at the document that was passed out to you, it says draft for public review. That's what this is. This is not the final document. We knew when it was first presented it wasn't the final document. And so at that point, we still are taking input. We're still taking input at this time. We have received over the last week or two several comments on this. I'm not going to sit here and pretend we're going to get through all of that today. It's quite possible we're going to have multiple work sessions to go through these, maybe more formal responses to the questions that we've received, because, I mean, thought went into putting these together. We'd like to have thought as we respond to those as well. But I think today, what, again, our primary goal is going to be is just to try to work through some of these recommendations, some of the things that we've heard, things that we have concerns about, which we've already relayed some of these to our development team. The draft that you are seeing, that you have copies of, is the same draft that's on the website right now. There are changes we know need to be made. As the director, I pretty much told them to hold off on any changes right now until we can have them all out in the open. That way everybody can look at this and say we're all looking at the same document, rather than saying, well, I'm looking at this, it says this, well, the draft online says that. We didn't want to get in that kind of a back and forth. So what we have here is still what was on the website, so just everybody be aware of that. As far as any other outcomes for this meeting, again, this is a work session. We're not looking for any kind of a final approval or anything like that. This was not advertised as a public hearing, so therefore we're not taking any votes or anything like that. In order to go through the adoption process, that has to be advertised. Those meetings have to be advertised at least 30 days in advance, and those have to have a public hearing associated with them. So we're not looking to do any kind of approvals today. We're simply looking to get through the recommendations and kind of see how we want to respond to those questions and different comments we've received and how that moves forward. I'm going to turn it over here to Michael Skipper here in just a minute with GNRC. I'll let him introduce his team, but we have with him Jessica Hill and also Emery Hartz from GNRC that can help go through this presentation and answer questions as well. But again, I just want to make sure everybody is aware that this is what is expected of us today. And if we have to have multiple sessions, we will do that. That's not an issue in that regard. So with that, I think I've talked long enough. I will turn it over to Michael Skipper, and he has a presentation. What you're going to see is probably going to be familiar to everybody. A lot of the slides that are going to be gone through, most of these are in the plan. This will provide the background, just so everybody's on the same page. So a little of this will be a review. Just be aware of that. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Cart in here earlier. Are you still in the room, Mayor? Good to see you here. But as Doug mentioned, I'm Michael Skipper with the Greater Nashville Regional Council. We're the region's economic development district and regional planning organization that was established by the Tennessee General Assembly back in the 60s for a couple of reasons. One is to convene communities across the mid-state for the cooperative planning that they must do together under federal law to access funds for infrastructure and social services that flow back to the state in our region. So we were created to meet that requirement, that mandate of federal law back in the 60s. But I'd say principally we were created to serve the local communities that we represent. We represent 13 counties and the municipalities within across the mid-state, from Trousdale to our east over to the Tennessee River, Stewart, Humphreys, Houston counties, and then from the Kentucky state line, including Montgomery, Robertson, Sumner down through Williamson County. And so state legislature back in the 60s wanted to create additional capacity for local governments to do planning for their future and to pursue grants to invest in infrastructure to support economic development. So we're staff on the ground working for local communities across Middle Tennessee. Occasionally we get hired to be a consultant on a comprehensive plan, which is the case here. We're also working in Wilson County right now, helping them update their land use policy, working in the city of Portland, helping them update their comprehensive plan. So we do a lot of work at the local level. We also do a lot of work regionally to represent the collective vision of Middle Tennessee. So I have with me here Jessica Hill. She's been the principal planner assigned to this job, working hand in glove with Doug Damasi and his staff and the steering committee that was composed of public and private sector leaders early in this process. They are really the ones directing our day-to-day development of the draft plan, and then ultimately, though, we're looking for the complete buy-in by the Planning Commission, and are going to be happy to work alongside you as you shepherd this through the public comment and adoption process over the next few months. So for my part today, I'm going to provide a quick recap of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and some of the community engagement that we did that shapes the draft plan. And I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, who's been working more directly with you on the land use policy part of the plan. That's the biggest piece of a comprehensive plan, is a policy for how you're going to guide growth and development over the next few years. Then she'll turn it back over to me. I'll talk a little bit about infrastructure and some of what we've heard since we released the draft plan, and then we'll stick around for conversation amongst the Planning Commission, answer any questions that we can today. So I'll get into it now. What is Plan Rutherford? Again, this is hopefully not new information to you, but it is good to kind of look back at what we set out to do. But Plan Rutherford is the branded countywide initiative that's seeking to engage the community, both residents and the business community, in a vision and a conversation about the future to try to understand what their vision is for the county 25 years down the road. The purpose, though, is to develop a policy for the county to help manage the growth that we know is coming our way, and really to do that in one of two ways: to guide the development that's going to be occurring across the landscape, and then also to help the county and its partners prioritize its approach to delivering infrastructure and services to support that growth. And so it's really about understanding how the community wants to grow, as a input into the Planning Commission's management of the development review process, and then to the extent possible to influence other parties as they pursue infrastructure investments. So why now? The chairman mentioned the last plan was adopted late 2010. First year of its existence really was 2011. Since 2011, the county has grown by about 660 people per month, 30% between 2011, 2020, 30% growth, about 80,000 people added to the county over that time period. So there's been a lot of change, and looking forward out to the year 2045, which served as our planning horizon for community engagement and the modeling of sort of the measures of how well the future will perform for us. We're looking at another 60% growth over that between 2020 and 2045. So about another 215,000 people expected to land somewhere within the county by then. About 560,000 people we're planning for by 2045. And just for comparative purposes, we forecast growth for Middle Tennessee, then we also benchmark against other regions of the state and other states in the nation. And looking ahead to 2045, we do expect that Rutherford County and Williamson County, both within Middle Tennessee, will leapfrog Hamilton County, which is where Chattanooga is in the population rankings. So by then, before then, you'll expect it to be even larger than Hamilton County will be even in the future. So significant growth, and so Doug and his team was charged with updating that comprehensive plan. One thing I do want to point out, though, as I put this quote on the screen, is that this is not a regulatory document. This is a policy framework for within which the Planning Commission will be advising the County Commission on issues related to growth and development. It's really intended to represent the community's vision for itself, translated in a set of policies that can give you confidence that the decisions you're making through your regulations are going to be aligned with what your constituents are expecting into the future. And constituents are not homogenous. There are varied opinions across the county in terms of whether we should grow, how fast we should grow, where the growth should occur. And so we strive just to make sure we are providing a balanced view of that vision, knowing that not everybody thinks the same way. But if this is not a regulatory document, for this plan to be implemented, it'll require you to implement it through your zoning ordinance, your subdivision regulations, and the other tools that you have to guide where growth is going to land in the future. As far as the community outreach, which I'll talk a little bit about, I'll talk about the outreach process that we used. I'll talk a little bit about what you'd expect to see in the draft plan now, then I'll turn it over to Jessica. As far as the community outreach, this is really a three-phase process. We're in phase 3 now, so the plan drafting, getting feedback, make sure we heard everything the right way, that it's as you intend before you take it through your formal public hearing and adoption process. But phase 1, step 1 really was a listening tour. Several workshops, several meetings with this body, joint meetings with the county commission, stakeholder groups convened very early in the process. There was a lot of data in the beginning where we were forecasting future growth and development and looking at some of the implications of that growth. For example, we were seeing that for the prime ag land that's out there today, we are expected to lose 76% of that by the year 2045. We were seeing that the morning commute times between Murfreesboro and Nashville were expected to more than double over that time period. So we were trying to understand the implications of the growth trajectory that we had in front of us. So that's a lot of what we're doing in phase 1 was projecting that forward and then getting the reaction of the community. Like, how do those forecasts make you feel? Is that future that we're painting in terms of your current trajectory, is that in line with what you hope for yourself? And so we did a lot of just trying to understand what people like about their community, what they would like to see improved over time, concerns they had about growth and development, so on and so forth. And from that, we were able to take away some really important key findings about what was important to the community. And this became really useful input when it came to shaping the policy framework of the plan. So the policy framework would consist of the vision statement, the goals, the objectives that we were trying to achieve. A lot of that was informed by phase 1, which was the visioning and setting of expectations. There were overarching themes that emerged, and I think that a couple of that it didn't matter where we went. The idea of slowing the pace of farmland conversion, the idea of responsible sort of fiscal management of the county's budget, and making sure that growth wasn't outpacing the county's financial ability to keep up with infrastructure. These were themes that just kept popping up everywhere we went. And that was on top of, just everybody being dissatisfied with the levels of traffic congestion and transportation options that exist in the county and across the region. Some imagery from phase 2. Phase 2 is then when we rolled up the sleeves and said, okay, if there's something about the projected future that doesn't seem to sit well with you, what's an alternative way of growing? So we engaged folks with some scenario planning just to look at a couple of different futures that we were then able to measure their effectiveness towards meeting those objectives too. So people understood the trade-offs associated with growing in a more dispersed way versus a more compact way, or growing in areas that had infrastructure versus in areas that do not. And so just a good conversation with the community and a series of workshops across the county in terms of the different ways to grow from a spatial perspective. Some more imagery from those workshops. These were the metrics for community engagement that we had going into the July work session at MTSU, if you remember. That's the first time we began rolling out the initial presentation of the draft policy framework, which was largely centered around the community character areas that Jessica will talk about in a minute. But since July, we've had all the community engagement that we've been doing to wrap up phase 2 and phase 3. Those aren't reflected here, but we'll talk a little bit more about that near the end of our time together this morning. The vision statement, as it came out of the process, I'll read this to you just very quickly. Rutherford County will be a community that celebrates its history, small town heritage, natural resources, and diverse set of values while advancing towards a prosperous future through responsible growth. And the idea of responsible growth and managed growth surfaced time and time again. The 4 goals that are identified in the plan relate to managing growth, preserving character, enabling prosperity, and aligning infrastructure. And within the document, you'll see the first few chapters of the document are really background information, in terms of the purpose of a plan, its legal authority, how it should be used, how it shouldn't be used, is chapter 1. Chapter 2 is a tour through the history of development across the county. What were the major milestones along the way that led to the spikes in population increases? Just try to understand where we've been. Chapter 3 was the synthesis of the community input in terms of vision and expectations. This is where we're laying out the guiding vision and the goal statements. I think chapters 4, 5, and 6 are proposed objectives and the objectives to each goal, and then the proposed actions that the county or its partners could be taking over the next few years to try to implement the plan itself. And then we wrap up with some strategies that we offer to help you get the plan implemented, to include assessing your zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations, and to embark upon an entirely separate process to get those things updated in a way that you think is beneficial to implementing the plan. So that's a look at what is in the document. I'm going to turn over now to Jessica Hill, who's going to walk you through really the cornerstone recommendation of the draft plan, which is that character area policy, and really the area where we've probably gotten the most significant amount of feedback.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's so nice to be with you this morning. It's been a lot of work, and I know I just want to also recognize the work of the steering committee that got us to this place. I think, Pettis, we had 8 meetings of the steering committee, so a lot of really helpful input from the committee members as well as from the public to get us to a place to look at where growth goes, where development occurs, and what that could look like into the future. So as Michael mentioned, we approached this with from a character area designation, really looking at the character of those places, the type of development that's likely to go in there, what does that form look like, so the intensity and density that we would be likely to see in those areas, whether it continue as it is today or it could shift into a new development pattern into the future to accommodate that expected or anticipated future growth that we are seeing. All right, so I'm going to walk through each of these 3 primary character areas with you. They have a general description, and this is in the draft plan. There's some larger full-page double-page spreads that provide a little bit more detail on each of these character areas that I go through. There's also blank index cards that we handed out. So if you think of something as you're reviewing this or as I'm talking about each of these and you want to take a note of it, that you want to provide input, please go ahead and use those index cards or whatever form of mechanism you would like to provide input. We definitely want to hear from you. So the first character area that I'm going to walk through is what we call the rural preserve. So these are areas in the county that are large acreages. They may be areas that have natural features that make it very challenging for development, so karst topography, very shallow bedrock, not going to perk very well. But it could also be those areas that are primary farmland and agricultural lands that we know that are important to the community and to Rutherford County to preserve. So when we look at so that's a description. When you think of it, you're probably imagining driving down a country road, looking out, seeing a fence with horses or cows in the pasture, or out in the rolling countryside. That's what we're wanting you to imagine when you think of rural preserve. So low density, single family homes, agricultural uses, and then large swaths of natural green space areas. The next is moving up into a more denser development pattern and intensity. So this character area we're calling Rural Preserve. This is, again, very large lot, low density residential. You're shifting to more of kind of what we would, I know people have called it estate type development pattern, large mansions on large lots, but still remaining very rural, large acreages, getting into maybe more of those like hobby farms, acreage sizes. There are often small nodes of commercial activity. So we, in the map, you probably noticed a phrase called rural crossroads. So recognizing that out in the rural Rutherford County, there are areas around these intersections of primary routes that have spurred either a post office or a hardware store out in like Milton and Las Casas. So those are areas out in the rural living that we would consider rural crossroads, so some commercial nodes. And then moving into the highest intensity density pattern in the county, and this would be constrained primarily in the UGB surrounding Eagleville, Murfreesboro, and Smyrna Laverne. So this is generally formed as subdivisions. So think of your typical subdivisions that you're probably seeing a lot come into the Planning Commission. So cul-de-sac pattern, most likely curvilinear. They're often buffered by that rural countryside, rural living, so they back up to farmland. And we call that borrowing open space from their neighbors. There is typically still remaining medium to low density residential development, but again, the primary focus in this UGB area, the rural, like county suburban, is single family residential, with some getting into that commercial as they come down across some of the state routes outside of the cities. And I know this was a major component of a lot of the comments that we've received, so I think it is it is under consideration that we want your input on the density patterns for each of these character areas. So again, what is in front of you is what was presented at the public meeting in October. So the Rural Preserve, and I'm sure as you all know as planning commissioners, the state of Tennessee recognizes a subdivision at 5 acres, so that puts a kind of a limiting, I wouldn't call it a limiting factor, but it is a place where regulatory actions come into play when people come in and subdivide. That's the threshold, is that 5 acres and access to a public road. So the Rural Preserve, the lower end, the preferred densities was 1 residential unit per 15 acres, with the higher end being that 5 acre, 1 residential unit per 5 acres. So at the threshold of the subdivision. The rural living, that is right at the threshold of the subdivision, so 1 residential unit per 5 acres and up to 1 unit per acre. So that's the higher end threshold for rural living. And then for county suburban, what the lower end is the 1 unit per 1 acre, and then the higher end density is the 3 units per acre. So this is probably one of the areas that we'll want to hear your input on, if we got it right. If not, what would be the recommendations to reflect where the development pattern in the future. All right, so the other part that we looked at when we were assessing the locations of the character areas, the likelihood of development, we looked at it from a perspective of what is there today, what is served by infrastructure, by roads, but also what is likely to develop. So we looked at it from a perspective of marketability and developability, which are very hard words to say. But the degree of marketability, the darker blue represents areas with those larger lots cleared land, lower land values, and they're closer to those major roads, interchanges, and schools. So they're most likely, the darker the shade, they're more likely to develop. The next map is looking at developability. And these are areas with water and sewer utilities, the transportation capacity, less steep slopes, soils that perk with a C, not a K, and then fewer sinkholes, and then the bedrock is at a lower depth, meaning there's more soil to either perk or you do not have to blast, so it's more likely that developers are going to prefer that lower cost. And the darker the teal, the higher degree of developability. When you combine marketability and developability, we get a land suitability for development map. And we looked at this from a quadrant approach, so high-low from both perspectives. So the green color is areas of the county that are high marketability and high developability. Probably is no surprise to you all, it's within the UGBs and along some of your major transportation corridors out into the county. And then the lightest shade that's almost white is the lowest market, low developability quadrant. And then you've got some degrees in between. But we wanted to just share this with you all as a perspective or as an input to how we got to the character area map and the locations of places like the rural preserve, the rural living, and the county suburban to make sure we accounted for market demands, infrastructure that's there to support, but also recognizing the community's input on what's important in the future to preserve and conserve as we look at accommodating the significant amount of growth that's coming. And I think at that point, I'm handing it over to Michael, so thank you all.
Jessica, Mr. Chair, just a few more slides before we turn it back to you for conversation. I wanted to take the baton from Jessica, talk a little bit about what we did in terms of trying to assess the transportation system within the context of not only your projected growth, but in terms of how you would want to grow. And this is a process that we have a lot of strengths as an organization, as we serve as the regional transportation planning organization, and on a daily basis, even when we're not working with a local government, are forecasting future traffic volumes across the regional roadway network, as well as transit ridership and walking and biking demand. So we have a lot of folks in-house who have a lot of expertise in terms of assessing a transportation system's ability to meet growing demand. So we looked at all the data that's available to us in terms of present day and historical traffic volumes, crashes. We do a lot to look at the severity of crashes, who's involved in crashes. Often we're looking for hot spots along the roadway network that could be addressed through safety countermeasures, and so that'll be baked into your recommendations with the final version of the document as well. We look at where we're seeing then growth and projected change across the transportation system, both in terms of projected increases in volume, but also how that translates into reductions in travel speeds that one may experience on the roadways, which is typically how they're going to be assessing performance for themselves. And so the next few maps are really just representing some of that data. This map here is where we're seeing the most significant rate of change in terms of traffic volumes across the roadways. And so the roads that are popping up and becoming darker and the lines becoming thicker are where you're expected to see the most significant traffic volume increases between now and the future. This next map is where you're expected to see well, actually, I'm going to show you two time frames here. I'm going to show you the relative travel speeds today. We're going to project that forward based on that 2045 growth trend. This is today, and so think of this like you look at Google Maps and go to the traffic mode, and you see where you're seeing daily recurring traffic congestion today. The darker the red, the slower you're likely to go at some point during the day there. That's today, and then this is out into the future. So clearly the traffic volume will be leading to some slowered movement improvements along the roadways, and so this was the basis for us identifying certain links on the network across the county that really needs to grapple with capacity improvements. We've had some initial conversations with Mike and the County Highway Department in terms of what the proper cross-section would be for these facilities, but these are facilities, these are parts of routes that we know from a volume to capacity ratio are going to have to be dealt with between now and the year 2045 based on how you're projected to grow. Now, some of these maps could be altered if you are able to avoid, places where you don't have the transportation capacity. If those are also places that are not suitable for growth, and then your zoning and your subdivision regulations could properly reflect that limited capacity. There's some things that you can do to try to prevent some of this from happening or just to offset it along the way. But this is a look at where we had recommended capacity on the county roadway network. These are areas where we're recommending enhanced shoulders. So it's not a surprise to you, it's not unique to Rutherford County, but across Middle Tennessee in fast-growing places, we've got subdivisions popping up along rural county roads that lack shoulders, often just right off into a ditch, very unsafe conditions for certainly pedestrians, kids walk into bus stops, but definitely even for motorists. Usually you see elevated speeds on these routes, no shoulders, very dangerous situation. So these are locations across the county where we're recommending enhanced shoulders. This would be a minimum 2-foot shoulder up to 4, 6, 8 foot, depending on the context. We also looked at the propensity for folks to be walking or biking across the county. This is in terms of existing behavior, or where our models anticipate that it sees latent demand for walking and biking, and should there be a facility to support that, you would actually activate that demand. So these are the routes that, as they're improved, you would want to be purposeful in accommodating pedestrians and cyclists across the county. And then, if I'm keeping up, and then we also do some work to break out ownership of the routes, what's owned by the county, what's owned by the state. One of our roles as regional planning organization is to convene local cities and counties across our area and interface them with the Tennessee Department of Transportation, help them prioritize where investments are going to go with state or federal funds over the next 25 years. And so one of the benefits of working with us is that knowledge that we'll gain from what you're trying to accomplish from a transportation perspective, so that we can appropriately position those for state and federal dollars. And then also want to just point out that, bridges across Tennessee are aging, and they are seeing increased volumes. And so there's a lot of emphasis these days from local communities and conversations with TDOT just to make sure that as they're inspecting bridges and finding issues, that there's also a pot of money made available to local communities to make those repairs. But there's also an opportunity as you improve a roadway for capacity purposes or multimodal accommodations, that you can go ahead and knock out that bridge improvement as well. And so it's just want you to be mindful of those opportunities as you pursue your transportation investments. The plan also gets into the importance of coordinating with other aspects of infrastructure, schools. We've done a lot of analysis looking at the geographic zones of the schools that are across the county, looking at how well they line up with the projection for school-age kids into the future. Had some really good conversations with staff at the school district on facility needs, and it's just important that as you're evaluating proposed developments that you have a way of more formally checking with schools and being part of their planning process from a long-range standpoint when it comes to facilities planning across the county. The utilities district and solid waste or other aspects of infrastructure in terms of utilities with water and wastewater. It's really important that we bring to the conversation an understanding of where the capacity currently is and where those utility districts or other asset owners are planning to expand into the future. So we try to avoid as much as possible mismatches in capital improvement programs and where the growth is going. Ideally, those are headed in the same direction. So there's some discussion about how to better coordinate across those entities that have a shared responsibility to help the Rutherford County residents and businesses see the future realize the future that they see for themselves. In terms of the feedback that we've gotten since this version of the document was released, which was at the October 24th open house that we had at Lane Agri Park, how many folks do we have in attendance there? About 150 folks. Many of the folks that were that are in the room today were also there or at past events, so it's good to see you all here as well. About 150 folks were on hand, where we walked them through the contents of the plan and gave them access to the document online. We have had a couple of different opportunities for the community to engage us. In the end, it's in any way that is easy for you. Just let us know how you feel about the plan, or let the staff know how you feel about the plan, and that will get to us as we prepare the final draft for the Planning Commission's process. But we've got planrutherford.org, obviously, which is really your gateway to learning about the planning process and the drafts as they evolve. You can download every single poster, or I think all the slide shows that we've shown over the course of the last couple of years are all downloadable from the website. You could also access a digital copy of the plan document, and then also an interactive map where you can leave comments on a map or draw your own boundaries on the map as well. Both of the document and the map are also linked from planrutherford.org. Mr. Chair and Doug, just to wrap up my part of our presentation today and turn it back over to you, just wanted to leave you with some of what we're hearing through the process so far. You're aware of this. In a lot of cases, you routed this feedback to us, but it is fairly validated by the information that we're getting directly from stakeholders as well. So general feedback: support for the plan's strategies to slow the high rate of farmland conversion. A lot of support there. I mean, I think one of the unique things about this plan, when compared to the other planning processes that we're working on across the mid-state, the focus on farmland conversion is extremely elevated in the conversations that we're having. And so people are recognizing at least the proposed actions and even the character area policy in terms of its considerations for trying to contribute to that goal that many in the county have for themselves. Number two here, support for focusing growth within the urban growth boundaries, whether it's conversations with the chamber or other business groups. When we get into working with them to try to anticipate where jobs are going to be in the future, most of them anticipate those jobs to be occurring within the city limits of the 4 cities today, or within their urban growth boundaries. And so I think there's a lot of recognition from those that are reviewing the plan that the notion of guiding growth towards a suburban character area is consistent with where people had expected growth to occur anyway. And so just making sure that the policies align with those expectations is really important. There's also support for the coordinated planning with municipalities and the other entities that are responsible for planning and delivering infrastructure. This is a significant objective that this plan tries to achieve. It's not going to do the coordination for you, but hopefully set up those relationships and begin a conversation about the process and the procedures that would be beneficial on a recurring basis to ensure that that coordination happens. But there are concerns. A lot of these concerns are really just concerns about the big picture that the county is facing, but they're concerns about the document in the sense that it's important that the document satisfactorily address these concerns and point out the things that it's doing to address these concerns and things that the plan itself would not have the purview to address. And so it's still important to recognize those things. Concerns about the county's ability to provide the necessary infrastructure, transportation, solid waste, often are brought up, but water, sewer, so on and so forth. Concerns about the plan's impact on property rights. I think there have been several conversations about what cities and counties are permitted to do under state law, and the protections or even the challenges at the Supreme Court over this nation's decades about the importance of local governments being able to regulate form and function and location of growth to protect the interests of public health are really well vetted. But how do we strike that balance between making sure we as a community can guide where growth is going without taking the property rights away from individuals, I think is an important conversation to lean in and make sure that this document is properly addressing the distinction there. Concerns about the plan's impact on economic growth. just I guess the idea that if you have a plan that says, we probably shouldn't be growing over here, does that mean that nobody's going to be allowed to develop in that area? Is that taking away the economic opportunity of those areas where you would like to see less growth? So just having maybe a more clear conversation in the planning document about the truth of a scenario like that. There's confusion, and just generally, this is not unique to Rutherford County or this process, but until you get into a plan update or update your zoning ordinance, most folks, may not even know those documents exist or what the difference between these documents would be. And so just making sure it's clear that the comprehensive plan is policy and not a regulatory document. It's intended to be a bridge between the community's vision and the role you have as a planning commission to guide growth as it occurs. And then finally, as I think it was mentioned earlier during their formal meeting, but TDOT is pursuing an expansion of the I-24 corridor, incorporate choice lanes, which are toll lanes that you could choose to pay for if you want. Those choice lanes would also carry a higher quality regional transit service as well. And so thinking about how that may impact growth, particularly at those interchanges, both existing interchanges and potentially new interchanges, and how that might impact growth in the county is something that even more recently, since we released this document, we've been trying to grapple with, so that you are left with something that is preparing you for that eventuality that we'll see in the next few years from TDOT. So, Mr. Chair, Doug, that is our presentation. Conversation, answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Michael and Jessica, for the presentation. I mean, I guess at this point, if we could just go back to like I said, Michael had mentioned this earlier, some of the most, I would say most of the responses we received really involve the overall growth areas and the densities in the different rural living, rural preserve, the character areas and whatnot. I'm just going to put this map up there just so everybody's got it. It's also in the plan document itself for you to take a look at. At this point, like I said, we've received quite a few comments on this. Michael did a good job just kind of summarizing just in high-level terms the things that we've seen and the things that we've received. Again, we're not going to be able to get to all of these today, but we kind of want to start at least the process rolling about the Planning Commission's thoughts on this, and based on the input that we've received and what changes they might want to make or see made in this. Again, we're looking for this input to give back to our GNRC team in order for them to start making the changes before we start bringing anything for public hearing. So with that, I'm just going to, Mr. Chairman, I guess turn it over to you and kind of let you guide the discussion at this point.
Have seen this before or discussed it with several people, where we talk about rural preserve, rural living, county, suburban, municipality, crossroads, and the whole different things there. As you can, and those of you in the audience are looking at this, the dark brown area is what they call rural preserve. And if you'll look to see where that is, that's primarily a hillside with a lot of trees, a lot of rock, that type of area. Dark green, as was mentioned there, somewhat of the same area, large open space. But I think Michael sort of did a good job of defining that. Have some of you looked at that? Now, one thing in particular there, and this is Doug there, it mentions that we show there one residential per 15 acres. First of all, I don't think the state of Tennessee will allow that. Acres is a large, how you look at it and what you've got to do there. I'm just throwing that out for discussion. But I think the steering committee, as they looked at that, this is acreage that what they were seeing is just not land that is made for this is open.
And I'll kind of just to add on to what Chairman Reed is saying, this is something that we pretty much identified early on after we saw these different recommendations for the lower end and higher end density regarding the rural preserve. Not just that, but even the rural living and the rural, or I'm sorry, the county suburban, when we look at those three. When you look at the map and some of the discussions that I've had since that time, you know, obviously, like Pettis was saying, anything in the rural preserve, we really can't, from a zoning standpoint, be difficult to enforce something more than a 5-acre minimum. We just, with the state law written the way that it is, and the fact that we wouldn't see larger subdivisions, somebody comes in and breaks it into 10 acres, I don't want to be in a position where somebody comes in for a building permit, has 10 acres of land, I have to sit there and tell them, oh, sorry, you can't do that because you have a minimum of 15 acre, 20, whatever it is. So, and we've relayed that to our consultant team. They're aware of that, and that is one of the changes we are recommending. Again, nothing's been changed in the document yet because we want to make sure everybody's looking at the same document. In the rural living area, you know, you've got that range anywhere from 1 to 5 acres. You know, kind of what my thoughts were on this, and again, this is just Doug talking, is you look at it from a standpoint of those areas that are closer to the rural preserve, maybe they have a slightly higher minimum, and then you kind of tail it in as it comes in closer to the urban growth boundaries. That gets more and more, I guess, dense, for lack of a better word, as opposed to like a 1 per 5 or a 1 for 2.5. Maybe it's a 1 per 1 acre or something like that as you start getting into the urban growth boundaries. Then the urban growth boundaries themselves, of course, those will be left as is, or we would encourage growth in those areas as well. Again, closer to the municipalities, closer to existing services and things, might make more sense in that regard to look at the existing densities the way they are, maybe even the ability to increase densities. I know one of the questions we received had to do with incentives for increased development in some of these areas. That might be something to look at in the county suburban area. There's also the ability to look at tools in the zoning, like conservation subdivisions like they do in Williamson County and other places, not just in Williamson County, where you're not necessarily getting any kind of a density increase necessarily, depending on how it's structured, but you are able to at least reduce the lot size and keep a lot of the land that's not developable in more of a conservation, but they're not losing the amount of density that they could have regardless. So there are tools for that. The plan makes recommendations on these tools. At the end of every chapter that you see, especially the one that deal with the 4 goals, you'll see that there's a list of recommendations, proposed actions, if you will, for everyone. And I will say this, that these proposed actions are just that, they're recommended actions. These are not something that we're going to do every single one of these steps. There's really no way we're going to be able to accomplish some of these things. It might be good to look at this plan and to put some language into those proposed actions to say these are all while we realize that these are proposed actions, these are recommendations, and that some of these may work in the county, some of them may not. So maybe just a little bit more, you know, for lack of a better word, squishy language in some of those. I think that's something that would be appropriate as well. So I really like that, the map of development suitability, and I'll just kind of, and bear with me as I get to there we go. This is actually in the document as well. It's on page 24 of the handout. You'll see those areas that are high market, high developability. You know, maybe we look at the ability of some of those areas as opposed to some of those that are more low market, low development, marketability. These are just ideas to throw out there. You know, there was some discussion about, you know, growth along the major corridors, which is where you kind of see some of these more higher marketability and developable areas along these major corridors, maybe looking at some provision for growth along those corridors as opposed to when you start getting out into the more rural areas. I think there's some ability to look at that as well. So those are just, again, I'm just spouting off ideas here, but that's what we're here for, is to try to get some ideas and some guidance for our consultant team.
I think Doug is totally right. This map right here, the land that is suitability of development, is probably one of the better maps that you'll see within here. I really like too. It pretty much hits it right on the head when you look at it. When I saw that, I had to look. I said, I don't know if any of you look at these maps right here, but you always look to say, where do I live on that map? I don't care what you do. Anytime you see a map, you always look to see, where do I live on that map? I looked at it, and it's totally exactly right what it's showing right there. I don't know if this works or not. And no, it's not going to work with it. But you look at the lower end of Rutherford County right here, going towards Eagleville, and you look at all the light blue and blue down here, and that area right down there, that would be a tough area to develop, a very tough area. You could do one house, two houses, and something of that area with no problem. But due to the fact of the land and the type of land that is in there, the type of soils that are in there, rock, hills, it'd be a tough build. You follow that all the way around, and what you're seeing right there, when you look at that, you see what Rutherford County is. You see exactly the build of Rutherford County. We sit in a bowl. I don't know if you ever noticed, when you walk outside this courthouse here and look around, you see hills all the way around you, don't you? It's just like sitting in a bathtub. You're looking at a drain. And we are the drain for Middle Tennessee. And you're sitting in a hole. I mean, I have a degree in plant and soil science, and that's what they describe this as, and that's what this is. This is the Nashville area of what we are right here, and we are the center drain for what is made here in Tennessee. And it's primarily made up of limestone rock, cedars, and that sort of thing. But what you see, this light blue around here, is the edges of that drain. And that's exactly what the soils that we're seeing here, and that's why the development changes on you. Look at your center, and coming all the way from Laverne, all the way down the center, that's your excellent farmland. Now, when the first settlers come in here, that's where they primarily wanted to go, because that's where the farms were. That's where the good land was. And when they come out my direction out here, my great-grandfather evidently didn't pay any attention to land maps, because he settled right in the middle of Champion Run out there. I don't know if that's where the horse died or if that's where he was planning to go. But that is pretty much it, and that's where we have been since 1802. But I know the soil, I know what's out there. It's full of sinkholes, it's full of rock, it's got a lot of that. But we've made a living out there all this time. But as far as development and building a lot of houses, as far as building shops and things of that type, you got a difficult problem. So this map right here pretty much shows Rutherford County. And we've got our engineer sitting here, and I think he could pretty much tell you this. But I think this map right here pretty much shows us what we've got as far as development of property within Rutherford County. And it follows all of the description of what we are in Rutherford County. But I want to hear what some of you think out there. We want to know what you're thinking.
And I will just add, this is being recorded, so if you speak into the microphone, so that'll get on the recording. Thank you.
Doug, can you find the map that had the proposed zoning areas?
Are you talking about the character areas, Mike? I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
Right there. How different is that, and the restrictions that that are proposed in this? How different is that than what we currently are at?
The area within the urban growth boundaries right now, which is the county suburban, the densities that are being recommended right now are pretty much similar to what's already, the zoning already is. When you start going out, and we can pull up a zoning map if we need to. When you start getting out beyond the urban growth boundaries, 3 units per acre does extend beyond the urban growth boundaries. That's under the existing, what's called the suburban belt model that we adopted back in 2011, after, discussion on it. The rest of the county outside of that is 1 unit per acre. So when you start getting into that rural preserve area, I mean, if we went with a 1 unit per 5 acres for rural preserve, that's what would be, it'd be a pretty significant change between 1 to 1 acre to 1 to 5 acres. The rural living area, depending on what we end up doing there, it could be a pretty, it could be not as significant as 1 to 5 versus 1 to 1, but it would be a change, yes.
So I'd like to say, first of all, I really did like particularly the statistics of what has happened over the last 40, 50 years and 10-year periods, and seeing the reasons for the increases in population. And it kind of, you could see the bumps when Bridgestone came along and the Industrial Development Board. They called it something else different back then. And then Nissan and several other significant events that caused populations to start taking this upward jump. And you see the demographics now, and we've got 11% senior citizens, 10% living below poverty level, 6% minority, and 32% blue collar. So it also takes these projections of how many houses that we need over different time periods, and using the average that they came up with of 2.77 people per house, I was kind of calculating out that we need about 36,000 homes over the next 10 years and about 72,000 homes over the next 20 years to satisfy the job growth. So the big question is, of course, I like this map of development suitability. I think that's perfect, and that's where we need to work with, because that's where people want to live. That's the area that's suitable for the easiest development and help keep things moderately priced for these blue collars and the seniors and that sort of thing. But the actual proposed zoning map is much smaller area than what the map of development suitability is. So therefore, my question, sorry to take so long to get around to this, but my question is what is the life expectancy of this area that you have on the proposed zoning map? How many years will that take to burn through that? And then there's no place for future housing, 10 years down the road, 12 years down the road, or whatever. Now, I think we should use realistic numbers. Doug uses this term a lot in when we have conversations about rezoning a property or potential rezoning. Yes, our regulations may say 3 houses per acre or 15,000 square foot lots, but we know that that's not going to happen because things happen. There are roads and there are easements and there are hillsides and sinkholes and other things, and you just don't get that rate. So if we could get a realistic life expectancy of what this proposed zoning map, that would be very, very helpful.
Yes, sir. Well, one of the things that we did early on, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we can get them for you, is we did do a build-out analysis of your current policies, including what's happening within the cities. And the amount, the capacity that you have in your current policy is a ton. It far exceeds the 2045 forecasts, right? But that's assuming that you take advantage of building with density where density is allowed. And so part of the conversation about coordinating with the municipalities, particularly in that suburban character area, is just to make sure that you're doing enough to provide the infrastructure that's going to enable the density to occur, so that you are maximizing the highest and best use of that property that is being converted into residential development. So there is a lot of capacity across the county to accommodate the growth that is projected. And particularly within that suburban character area. I know one of the conversations that we've had internally in terms of changing those density levels that as they currently read is, one, just sort of in the rural preserve, getting rid of the lower limit, because the lower limit it's essentially defined by state law. That goes up to about 1 unit every 5 acres. And that rural living is really where you would expect to see subdivisions happening. It's just really important that as subdivisions happen in the rural living area, they're happening near infrastructure, or that there is a way to provide that infrastructure, because far too often Middle Tennessee will build a subdivision, forget about the infrastructure, so everybody's, dying on the roadways, or just politically it's just too toxic of an environment to do anything about. So the rural living does enable subdivisions. It's just you're going to want to be a lot more thoughtful about where they go. But what you're going to try to do is accommodate as much housing as possible in that suburban character area, which also is more affordable for people to live in those areas that are close to services and close to the jobs that they're going to be commuting to. But we can get you the build-out numbers so that you can have confidence that the policy that you adopt doesn't restrict the supply of land so much that you're spiking the cost of housing and the cost of development.
In my mind, that's the key number, because we're here to be planners, not so much regulators, but planners. We know these people are coming. We are continuing to recruit new companies to move to the county. We're still stuck in the same pattern that we did in the 70s, and I think it talks about it in here. That's when the sprawl started, when we went to these large lot subdivisions and big houses. And I go back to what we learned in earlier things in some of our training in Nashville some years ago, and they kept talking about sprawl and how important it is to have density close to town. Well, this is, and looking at these 1 house per acre, and I'm talking about our highest density zone, 1 house per acre to 3 houses per acre. Well, that's not higher density. That's keeping things less dense than the way that we're even doing it now. And if we don't get some smaller lots very close to town, we're on the same path, or maybe even going worse, is the way I look at it. By reducing densities, we're going to be going the wrong way and exasperating the problem of sprawl that we're all trying to overcome.
Yes, sir. And I think I'm with you on particularly the notion that we don't want to update a plan in a way that exacerbates sprawl. I think one of the things you're doing with this plan versus the one that you adopted here is you are trying to limit density in areas where you can't support. That is the sprawl that you're talking about, right? Putting higher density development far away from infrastructure, far away from existing centers, that is sprawl. Like, sprawl doesn't mean you can't grow in the rural areas. It just needs to be appropriate. This plan tries to put more. Yeah.
But my thought line is, if we can attract these people closer to town with what they want, then they're not forced to go further out into these areas. If we can build subdivisions for them close to the infrastructure with lower density than what's being proposed here, then that's what they want. Let's give it to them. And they don't want to go out and build on the hillsides where you have to have soils and there's not many of them. So,
right. Yeah, and I think let's work on
that portion of what do we have, what kind of density do we need to get us through 2045 close to town?
Yes, sir, and I think the conversations that we've had with staff is particularly looking at that upper limit on the suburban character area to enable more density to happen in the places that you're mentioning here, which is closer to the existing cities. But we can run the build-out scenario for you so that you can see just how many. And to prove your point about the need for housing, if you look in one of my favorite parts of the historical perspective here is looking from 2010 to 2020 and the rate of change in terms of population and jobs, and I have the document in front of me. But if you look at the housing graphic, there's a significant, we think there's a lot of construction happening around us, and there is, right? That's not enough to keep up with the population growth. I mean, which is what's contributing to the higher housing prices. So the number of new housing units is far below the number of new people and number of new households. So it is important to make sure that we're planning for sufficient capacity for housing construction. And there's tremendous capacity within that suburban character area. And I think there is considerations from the steering committee and the staff about increasing the upper limit for that suburban character area. So we're not sending the wrong message in terms of where we'd like to see growth happen. Doug, anything you want to add to that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you guys have covered it pretty well. I mean, this goes into the whole thing too. The plan's making the recommendations as far as what we might want to see in these areas. Even if the plan's adopted, let's say we make these changes and the plan's adopted, we still have to put those recommendations into practice by changing our regulations. So at that point, are we looking at maybe a new zoning designation of something? Or, like we're at right now, we have a medium density residential, 3 units per acre. Are we looking at something a little more intense than that? A separate zoning classification? Do we just amend the one that we have? I mean, that's just part of the discussion. And I've said this in some other meetings before. Even if the plan's adopted, like I said, the recommendations just automatically take effect day one, right after the plan's adopted. When we adopted the current plan that we're under right now, we did an overhaul of our zoning ordinance. Several of you were here when that happened. You remember all that. That zoning didn't take effect till almost 2 years after the fact because we had to go through a separate process for that, public hearings and everything. So the zoning's not going to change regardless of what we do here, but based on the recommendations we make, that will inform what needs to be done to the regulations moving forward. So, I mean, this is really good discussion, but those are the things we need to look at, because we need to look at, A, where is this density going to go? B, do we have the current ability to regulate that kind of density based on the regulations we have? And that's where the changes would need to be made.
I'll just reinforce the idea that this is also painting a picture of the general tone and tenor of the landscape. It's not a parcel, you're going to look at this stuff parcel by parcel based on what is serving that parcel, what is around that parcel. Is that parcel closer to existing community, or is it far away from it? And there are nodes, a lot of our focus with the character areas is focused on those three larger geographies, the preserve, the living, and the suburban. But you do have planned nodes across the county in the unincorporated areas where you would expect to see a little bit more commercialization, and that'd probably be surrounded with a little bit higher intensity in terms of residential to take advantage of those nodes. And so that's also happening. But it's happening in places where there's existing infrastructure, there's good transportation, needs to be improved, but you're not building a new road to serve, subdivision kind of popped up in the middle of nowhere. So that's the other thing, is just keep in mind that this is about the general tone of the landscape, not necessarily every parcel within that rural living is going to be limited to 1 acre per unit at the upper end. Or yeah.
I want to address Doug's statement here, because we know that the actual zoning, the down zoning would be part of a different zoning ordinance at a later date. However, this plan does say on page 4, land use decisions must be consistent with the plan. So if you're putting in this plan an essential down zoning of 1 house per acre in that yellow zone up there where we need the density, then isn't the Planning Commission have to do something consistent with this plan that says we have to adopt 1 house per acre?
That is great feedback, because that's not the intent, to limit the upper limits of every single parcel. I mean, you're going to already have entitlements that exceed this policy. Again, this is about the broader area. So I think some language that talks about the relationship between the policy and the zoning is really important. And it's oftentimes you're going to probably make exceptions to your policy anyway. And what you're looking for is you're going to say, well, this wouldn't otherwise be a great place for a new subdivision, but the developer's providing this, and the TDOT's going to provide this. And so you begin to come up with a game plan to provide the conditions that don't currently exist right now as we're looking at it, but you bring those conditions together to enable that development to happen. That's still within your purview, right? But as a general sense of where you want, 1 acre lot subdivisions, this is really kind of providing a game plan for that. It's not intending to limit your ability to do a zoning change request at a higher intensity than what's allowed, one of these colors. And we can make sure that's a lot more clear so that you don't feel bound by this at that level of granularity.
And I also think that I read somewhere in there, I hate to take you down too far into this, and I'm going to quit.
That's good feedback.
I also read in there that any other type of development that is considered still does not exceed the recommended by the plan density. So even if we approve something with 10,000 square foot lots, then they're still not going to get any more on that parcel, that parcel of land. You're not still getting any higher overall density is what I'm saying. The density is the same, the way that the plan's worded.
Yeah, and that's good feedback. We'll make sure that that's not what we're saying in the document. It's about letting you know there's going to be some challenges with accommodating development at that intensity, and here are the things that you can do to allow that to move forward in a partnership between the entities that would be involved. So we'll make sure that happens. And the reality is, it's not going to be an easy. If you've got zoning that already entitles beyond this policy, it's going to be a very difficult thing to reduce that, to be honest with you. So this is about just, as you're working with the development community, you're letting them know this is where the community would really love to see you build new subdivisions, and this is where the community probably would not like you to. I mean, across it's not unique. It's not like Rutherford County is doing something wrong by having a comprehensive plan. Like communities across the state, communities across this county have comprehensive plans that do exactly what this is doing. But if you don't communicate the vision of the residents and the businesses for the future, then what do you go off of? If you don't put that into policy, what do you go off of when you're trying to implement your zoning ordinance? That's more of a rhetorical question. I don't know what.
Michael, did you say there's a website we could go to look at
Yes, sir.
interactive? What was
Yes, sir.
it?
PlanRutherford.org.
Oh, I've got that website,
Yeah,
but
it's all
you
linked
says
there.
interactive map there.
You've got the ability to download just about every poster we've ever done, slides, and then there is an interactive map. There's the digital document, but that map is interactive, and you can draw on the map, and you can annotate with your comments on that map, both in terms of the character areas and the transportation and recommendations.
I've got something that would help me now that we're 2 years into this, and that's talking about there's some modifications or corrections that need to be made. If there was a way we could get that on there where we could see what those are, because I've spent time to read this document, and if it's not factual or for some changes we need to be made, I need to know what those are. It would help me a lot. So if we got a list of those and what page they're on.
Yeah, I think maybe Doug can expand on what he was saying earlier. There's just been a lot of conversation already about, very similar to the conversation we're having today. Like, for example, conversations about maybe increasing the dwelling units per acre in the suburban character from 3, which is the upper end now, something along the lines of 4 or 5, which would put you on par with what the municipalities have for a medium residential density in the city limits. So those aren't really corrections. They're just people's reactions to the plan already. And so this meeting is really helping us get more of that so that when we put the next version, and the next version will be, this is still a Word document to get you focused on what it's saying, what those proposed actions are. But the comms team has put together a nice glossy version. It's got a lot more visualizations, a lot more contextual information, case studies, more language that talks about why housing, how the plan relates to housing. Now, the plan doesn't directly have policy that solves the housing challenge. That's a supply-demand thing. That's how you do your development review. It's what the cities are doing to accommodate density, which is where growth is most likely. It's where the majority of growth is going. That's where the majority of growth will likely to go into the cities. So how can the county support the cities in that endeavor to protect the fiscal realities of the county government? So yes, sir, I think as we get this direction from Doug and the Planning Commission and the steering committee, you'll see that next draft.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just, real quick, Jim, I'll just kind of dovetail on what Michael was saying. As I said, we've received several documents of feedback over the last week or two. I mean, obviously, we weren't in a position to have something formal today, but what I would like to see as we go on is to, like, again, time and effort went into preparing these questions that were sent to us, and we would like to take time and effort in preparing our responses. When it comes to the changes of Plan Rutherford and the things that we're changing, we'd like to be able to say this is what's changed and what are we basing it on? What's the change and what did we base the change on? That way everybody knows, okay, this is the original draft, this is the new draft, this is what we changed, and this is why we changed it. So that's a work in progress, of course, and this is the first step of that. I think your point's very well taken as far as as, looking at the document, again, which is why we didn't want to make any changes right now, because if you're looking at this, well, is this the same thing that was online? Well, no, we made changes. Well, you want to make sure that everybody's looking at the same document, so.
Okay. Mike, one of the things for me as I try to read the document, look at the reality of what's going on. Again, it's a government document, so it already has a lot of scrutiny just with that, what's coming, what's really been said. And for me, I think in terms of infrastructure, and we use that word so loosely, but in reality, all we got to do is get out and ride the roads and find out what we're talking about. The citizens know what we're talking about when we talk about infrastructure. One of the things that I am seeing and I am hearing is you've got a certain group of the citizens that want no regulation. They don't want any limits on anything. 6, 8, 10 houses to the acre be adequate, You got some at 1 house per 100 acres. We know there's a balance somewhere in here that we're going to have to meet, but for me, roads, water, internet's critical if we're going to develop out, Just in one of the meetings with CUD, when we talk about what is the life expectancy as far as water that we have today, that's something we got to keep putting to the forefront. When we talk about if we don't do anything but stay on the growth pattern we're at, we got about 7 years.
Well, and some of these issues are not, they're ever changing. How much water you have, the allocation of water, it's a regional, it's a statewide issue. It's not just about the decisions you're making here. You're going to be impacted by decisions that are being made by others in our watershed and the water basin, the way the regulations manage both water, stormwater. And so, again, this is about representing what the community would like to see for themselves in the future. It's not intended to be a regulation that says you can't develop here. It says this is what the vision is, and it allows you to come up with the conditions that multiple entities can be part of creating. So if you solve the water problem or the transportation problem in a place that doesn't currently exist, it empowers you to, have a heightened interest in development in that area. And so when it comes to improving the infrastructure, I think the reality here is that there's no identified pot of money that's going to be able to go make all these roadway investments today, right? Not even if TDOT put, maxed out their investments in Rutherford County, you're probably still going to be behind on the scheduled transportation investments that would allow you to accommodate this growth. So until the time that you have the capacity to provide that infrastructure, it makes the most sense to try to encourage growth to go into places that do have that infrastructure.
I think that's important. When I hear 30-something thousand houses, we don't have the infrastructure on the outlying areas. We've got to build these municipalities that's identified where the infrastructure's at. So that's the message that I'm hearing. I am hearing it, and I believe it. I think your builder group will tell you they can build houses a lot more affordable when they can put a lot of them together and when they're closer. I don't think they want to drive 25 miles out to build a house, especially if I'm going to get to build one on 5 acres. They'd rather build where it's closer together. So got a lot more communication got to take place. Thank you.
Michael, just as he mentioned there, we received questions this morning at 2:24 a.m. and it dealt with watersheds. People even thinking of watersheds. This was from Stones River Watershed Association, dealing with increased flood risk, wetlands, shallow groundwater, and that sort of dealt with the Nashville Basin area, and that's pretty so we're still getting questions as far as everything we do right here, and as Doug has said here, we're continually looking at them. Changing there. I mentioned a while ago the Murfreesboro 2035. That's why they are still changing theirs, and they did their plan, I think, 2017? some time ago, and they're still changing theirs. Theirs is a 20-year plan, and just as this one right here is, it's a living plan. Something that is it's a moving target, I guess is what you would say. That's why we're asking commission like this help us and try to make it right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A constituent of mine had asked if we have done or will do a comprehensive inventory of the county as far as existing infrastructure such as roads, water, schools, and so forth. On the map of suitability, does that reflect an inventory, or how did we come up with this information?
Yes, sir, we have really good data, both databases and GIS data that describes where infrastructure is and that infrastructure's capacity. And then we have the ability to model future population jobs to a parcel level to assess its impact on that same capacity. And then, to the extent there are recommendations for where to improve water or sewer, where to put a school, then we can use those same models to help assess whether that's a good location or not. And that's kind of part of the continuous nature of what the chair talks about. And I know the interest of Doug and his team is that this is a general game plan. The decisions that you're making meeting to meeting about individual developments, you need to be looking at data on the ground and the infrastructure specific to that parcel, right? And that information is constantly changing as infrastructure goes online, comes offline, gets maxed out. And there are private payers, there are public payers. And so this is, again, even the issues of what to do about water and stormwater, those are going to be things that are dealt with through, not specifically through the plan, but stormwater regulations and the other things that you do as a county government in concert with state and federal agencies and the municipalities to manage your systems on a day-to-day basis. But when you zoom out and look at, what the earth is giving us and where the existing infrastructure is now and the kind of growth that we expect coming our way over the next 25 years, the character area map is a reasonable balance between, and in my view, I mean, there will be feedback from both perspectives as we go through this process, but I think it's a reasonable balance between knowing we've got to identify areas that need density to accommodate growth, but also knowing that there are places where growth can be very expensive to the taxpayer and very difficult for developers.
So is this a true statement to say that what is identified today as unsuitable for growth 10 or 15 years down the road with infrastructure improvements could be suitable?
It could be. And again, I think the chair just alluded to Murfreesboro's updates to its comprehensive plan. A fast-growing community ought to be updating their comprehensive plan probably every 5 years. It was 2011 since the last time you looked at the policy. That's quick math, 14 years. I probably am embarrassing myself with the math, but about every 5 years, you really ought to be looking to see what's changed in terms of the infrastructure capacity, the attitude, opinion of the business community and residents, because those change too. So every 5 years is a really good rule of thumb for a fast-growing county like this.
Commissioner, it's not the 10 Commandments, not carved in stone, because we had taken exactly what happened back here in 2011 and look at it today and see what they're not the same anymore. Have to look at it every so often. If not, you'll catch yourself behind. I think when we started on this, I was looking at this morning. I was going charts in here and showing the exact population of Rutherford County. Changes.
Well, and ideally, though, if you're updating this thing every 5 years, it's not taking 3 years to do it. But in a way, that kind of speaks to the notion of trying to do this on an ongoing basis. You may do an update to the plan every 5 years that counts for all the changes in infrastructure, but you ought to really be measuring people's attitudes and opinions in the market just on a regular basis. So, one of the things that is so time-consuming about some of these plan updates is that you have to go get all that data and get it compiled, but if you just manage that understanding continuously, then it's just about a 5-year reset on what's changed. You're not having to start all over every time. So it doesn't need to take 2 or 3 years if you're in a more continuous pattern of assessing your policy.
Just one more thing, and I know time is running tight right now, but I think, Mr. DeMasi, you may be in possession of some questions or concerns from the Middle Tennessee Association of Realtors. I've recently got those. At our next work session, will we be in a position to address these?
Yes, sir, I believe we are. I mean, honestly, I think to some extent, maybe not, specifically, but we've talked around several of these already. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the ones I was referring to, actually. We've already started, kind of compiling some draft responses to these. And again, I mean, like I said, a lot of thought went into this, and we want to honor that, and and come up with responses worthy of the time that went into it. So, but some of the things that are discussed in here regarding like things like cost benefit analysis and things, there's actually recommended language in the plan right now that says the plan recommends that you do a cost benefit analysis on any new regulations and things like that to kind of find out, hey, is this going to do what you think it's going to do? Is it going to end up costing more? There's some language to that in the plan. We've talked about affordable housing. I know that was a question or a topic that was referenced a couple times on their document, and we have talked around that quite a bit today. As far as obviously that's not something, and I've said this in other meetings, we can't tackle that on our own. Obviously, we don't want to exacerbate the problem, kind of like what Jim Averill were saying. Don't want to do that, but that's going to take an approach of not just the county but the municipalities as well, recognizing the fact that there are factors involved with housing affordability that are outside of our control. We don't control interest rates, we don't control land costs, we don't control a lot of those things. That just the market does that. So we have to work within those parameters. But yes, I think the next work session will be in a better position to have more formal responses to these to answer your question.
Thank you. Michael, don't go anywhere. Get back up there, man. Thank you, Chair, for the recognition, and thank you for all your hard work, everybody so far. We all need a vision, right? We have to have some idea of what we'd like to see this county be, because without a vision, we just are willy-nilly. And even though we've had a vision, it seems like when you look at traffic, you look at things that it's been willy-nilly. And that's partly our fault, and it's partly our state legislators' fault. This is a big thing to try and get your hands around. And you're right, there are a lot of players that have interest in it, and nobody's going to be happy at the end of the day. Commissioner Averwater has made some really good points. Commissioner Thompson has made some really good points. And the one takeaway that as many years as I've been on this commission is we heard the word communication come up several times. I will tell you, Michael, that just in recent years, and I'm going to pick on the school board for a minute, the school would have a hard time looking for large pieces of land to develop schools, multi-campus schools. Well, they would find those, and they would typically be out away from good infrastructure. They would purchase the land, come to us, full commission for monies. We would have to approve it, and then the roads would be horrible to the school site. They would be county roads, but they would be substandard for the amount of traffic, right? So who would have to pay for those roads? Well, it's everybody in behind me and in front of me via our tax rate. So there was a lack of communication. We need to know where you're looking at school sites, because exactly like the developers, we would like to guide you in this direction where the infrastructure is already in place, right? So the same concept goes for development, which is what you're preaching in this comprehensive plan. We need to have a better communication, open channels with the development community and the realtor community to see where things are going. And even Chamber of Commerce, IDB, we fund the Industrial Development Board with a little bit of monies. We should have a better idea of where we think industry is trying to locate for infrastructure purposes. Because I don't want it to be like a traffic shed scenario where a developer comes and wants to put 500 homes somewhere outside of where infrastructure can support, and we say in a traffic shed scenario, well, I'm sorry, our county roads will only support 250, so you have to reduce your development. That's not good. Or what I'd like to say is, if you want the 600 homes, you're going to have to develop the road frontage to and from to the next major intersection. That's what really should happen, because it's not fair for the folks in front of me and the folks behind me to have to pay for that. So one of my questions is, Michael, is there other large counties within the state that have other means or triggers where developers or there's some mechanism of where they fund infrastructure outside of a property tax? Now, I know Rutherford County is a little different the way we're set up. We can't go out and charge a development fee. But could you do a zoned bond, a district type of a bond for that area where you pay for a road, and as soon as that's paid for, then it comes off your... I'm just curious, do you know of any other mechanisms that can fund infrastructure in those type of areas?
Definitely. Before I answer that question, though, I would definitely want to underscore the point you're trying to make about coordination with schools. When you look at that map, a lot of the marketability score for a parcel, we include its proximity to a school. And so if you just anecdotally think what happens when you build a new school somewhere because you need to serve more students, but you're going to where the land is cheap, regardless of what the other infrastructure has to say about it. But you got the acreage, you got the value, we're going to put a school here. That school then begins to attract people. And those people, the subdivisions are going on top of the same infrastructure that couldn't support the school in the first place. And it's just this vicious cycle that continues on and on. And so the getting upstream a little bit and having frank conversations about the school district and what facilities they're going to need in the future, and you being a little bit more collaborative in terms of where those school sites are and the commitments the county and the state are going to make to provide that infrastructure in those locations, if it's an optimal location, that we're all willing to invest in that location versus just letting the school build over here. But we have to respect everybody's roles and responsibilities, and we have sovereign immunity for school districts in the state of Tennessee historically, so it's more of an advisory and a collaboration than some people probably across the state would like. So it's just, those are the type of sort of partnership realities that exist. In terms of what you're describing, are there other funding mechanisms for development to be able to pay for infrastructure? The answer to that is yes, and it's a very uneven menu across the state because of just the way the statutes have addressed impact fees and adequate facilities taxes over the years. Certain communities can do X and others can't, and there's really no rhyme or reason as to why it's so it lacks uniformity other than just various interests have asked for different things over time. But I know that's one of the things that Mayor Carr and other mayors across Middle Tennessee, both city mayors and county mayors, are trying to grapple with, is how to go to the state and say, we need a way for our communities to develop where we need to develop, even when our property taxes and sales tax aren't going to be able to pay for the infrastructure. That sort of is at the nexus on the whole property rights issue, what the realtors want, what developers want. Nobody's saying necessarily, we don't want you to develop, we don't want you to exercise your right, but if you're going to, but for that to be exercised, certain conditions have to be in place. And if you're unwilling to wait until we can provide it as a public sector, well, then here's some opportunities for you to do it in the short term. But it's hard to have these conversations because you start talking about impact fees and inflationary condition where home prices are going up, and it's a hard conversation to have. But all this is just one big, difficult conversation to have in the end, right? But having a vision through the plan enables you to have more organized conversations about the difficult things as you move forward, which you'll need to do. I overextended my welcome.
Okay, commissioners, I think we've reached the almost the 12 o'clock time. What we're going to do, if it's okay, we're seeing what we are needing to do. We're needing a day set aside for this rather than having it during one of our meetings. We have particular time directly to Plan Rutherford. I think what we're going to just set a date for that. We'll get in contact with you, set that date if that's okay. Have another meeting. To go through that, if that is permissible with the to you. Anything else that needs to come before us at this time?
And I just want to just take a moment, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to say thank you for all those who attended and the input that we have received. We're still taking input, so I mean, we're not closing the door for any of that, just to make sure everybody understands that. But again, just kind of stay tuned. There's a lot here to digest, as I think we all understand, and we know that there are changes that need to be made, and that's what we're trying to do. So again, just stay tuned, and we'll be in touch as far as future dates and meetings and times and whatnot.
Appreciate everybody that was back here too, that glad that you've come today to show interest in what we're trying to do and your questions that are coming in. Like I said, we get them at 2:24 in the morning, and I get the notification telling me that they have come in, and you'll be surprised. I get up and look at them, see what we've got. With nothing else, we are adjourned.